Hello again, folks, and welcome back to World War II TV Week, Battle of Britain Week on World War II TV. I should say we have a double bill of shows coming at you today. Later on, 7 p.m, Alan Allport, the British historian living in the USA, is going to come on, and together we are going to discuss the Battle of Britain in popular memory, the imagery, the speeches, the iconic anniversaries, things like that. But that's later on. But right now, we are talking about the air sea rescue process. And I'm echoing back to the wonderful Victoria Taylor who was on Sunday talking about the Luftwaffe and how their psychological barrier and physical barrier was the English Channel. And the English Channel, of course, cost the lives of many pilots from both sides in the conflict and indeed lately in the latter part of the war as well. And so the rescuing of downed pilots, the recovery so that they can go back into the fight became an integral part of winning World War II. And joining me today to discuss this aspect, Steve Hale. His father was involved in air sea rescue. He said, I'm not to describe him as an expert. He's an enthusiast, and he wants to basically bring the air sea rescue process, the boats, the equipment, the technology, the people back into the Battle of Britain and World War II narrative. So that's what we're going to be doing. So joining me this afternoon is Steve Hale. So good afternoon. How are you doing?
I'm doing fine. Thanks very much, Paul. Yes.
So, you heard what I said there. Air sea rescue has, for whatever reason, kind of dropped a little bit out of the story in the years since the war. I mean, we have the Sea Shall Not Have Them 1950s movie with Dirk Bogarde, but that wasn't available on DVD for a long time. And even so, it is now. It's not as famous as The Cruel Sea and Reach for the Sky and all the other big classics. But obviously, I just said there in the top of the show, your father was involved in this, and you're involved in all sorts of projects in restoration of boats, promotion of what this service was. But, how important is it to you that the story of the rescue of pilots is back into the Battle of Britain understanding?
As you say, it's a question of bringing it back in. I think it never entered the conscience, as it were, of a large number of people, of the population. Actually, if you stopped the average person in the street and asked about air sea rescue, they would probably recall some lifeboat rescues, maybe royalty getting involved with helicopters and so on. Very few of them would have much idea about the role that air sea rescue, very important and a very dangerous role that they played in the war. And it's attempting to correct that, that I am trying, I guess with others, to put it on the map, albeit late in the day. And so that's basically what I'm trying to do. Perhaps I should say putting it on the chart, because we are talking about boats.
We're talking naval, yeah. And, the recurring theme, I think, will be two factors I've been thinking. One is, it's a practical need to get pilots back in the battle because they are costing a lot to train. There's a lot of investment, and there's always a shortage. And it's not just pilots, of course, it's air crews. And we get into the later part of the war, navigators. There's always a shortage of navigators. But it's also a morale aspect. When Victoria talked about how fearful the Luftwaffe were the Channel and going down the Channel and flying over England, it's also that idea that the Allied pilots feel there's some service in place that will go out and rescue them if they have to go down in the sea. Okay, there's lots of things that may go wrong, but it's a nice comfort to know that there's someone who is concerned about your welfare. And so I think they're the two themes that I think we'll be coming back to. But anyway, as with all of my guests, you've sent me lots and lots of images for a PowerPoint, so we'll fire away. And for folks, if you have questions for Steve, then please jump in, and I'll put some of your comments up on screen. But basically, I'm going to hand over to Steve, and then we'll have some questions. So over to you.
Okay. I think can I do this on a next slide, please, basis? Like
you can indeed. Yeah, that's the best way for me.
Okay, that's fine. Just going back, you were talking about the films, RAF films, and you've actually stolen my first lines. Which were, I was going to ask you, Paul, if you could name some RAF wartime films.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's the thing. I mean, because I've done my prep, I now know there are the ones that cover rescue. But the point is that most people, even when James Jeffries was on Sunday, the majority of films about the RAF are about fighter pilots. There's even very little about the bomber role, certainly in 1940. So, yeah, I know there are the films, but as we said, the average person perhaps doesn't.
Yeah, that's right. So, I mean, we could all come up with 633 Squadron, Dam Busters, all the, you know, Way to the Stars, Battle of Britain, Reach for the Sky, etc., etc. There's quite a few RAF, some fighter, some bomber films. There are just 2 air sea rescue ones. You mentioned The Sea Shall Not Have Them. I don't know if I hold that up to the camera. This is a DVD copy. Yeah, you got it?
Yep.
Yeah. Which was 1954, this one. And as you say, with Bogard and the like in it, and Redgrave. But then there's also this one, the only other air sea rescue one, really, that I know of, Ealing Studios, For Those in Peril. This was made in 1944.
I couldn't remember the title of it, but and that's much. It's almost, well, we don't want to go into a movie review show, but it's almost a kind of a public information film, isn't it? It's both theatrical movie and also kind of telling a story from an almost propaganda point of view. It's a kind of a hybrid, I would suggest.
It was watching these more than, you're not surprised that I've watched them more than once, that I did learn quite a bit in my learning curve about air sea rescue. I came to this learning curve just into retirement, really, just as my dad was, well, actually within a couple of, maybe 2 or 3 years of dying, basically. And he never talked about his life in air sea rescue. What we did have was a photograph, one photograph I can remember as a kid, and you'll see it later. But it shows a boat, an air sea rescue boat. And I'll go into details, the different types. And all I knew was that when that photograph was taken, he was in the rear gun turret. And I'll tell you a story about being in the rear gun turret later. So, okay, we've got the first slide then. These 2, can we go back to the previous one, please?
Sorry, it was my mistake. Didn't mean to click that.
These 2 fighters need no introduction at all. You touched on the fact that we could have sort of endless debate about which was the better one. It's the one behind that's my favourite one, but I won't go there. We'll move on from that. But if we can go to the next slide, please. The losses in the Battle of Britain. Around 600, give or take, lives. Now, a number of those lives they would have survived had they been rescued quickly. So you have an injured pilot, quite likely, might have tried to break out of a cockpit or something, but basically not fighting fit, let's put it that way. And then, of course, you've got the very cold sea. You might have a life raft, but the conditions are not good. And, of course, life is ebbing away from the minute they hit the deck. That's assuming they survive the impact. So these statistics really shocked the Air Ministry. This was in, obviously, 1940. So they started to think seriously, as you said, about how they could minimize the losses of pilots. It's a very expensive business to get new pilots up there and find them. Finding them in the first place was probably quite difficult. So this exercised the ministry. So moving on from the Battle of Britain, I know we're starting on the Battle of Britain. Next slide, thank you. Yes, they might have had a life raft. Clearly, there's a number of people trying to jump into this life raft. So it would have been from a bomber. That's pretty obvious. But they're all clambering in. They're on the North Sea or the English Channel. Never gets that hot, really. It's really very cold. Obviously, throughout the year, and you can imagine what it's like in the winter. As I say, if they're injured, they're going to succumb to the conditions quickly. So the search was on, or as it were, the project was to get to these pilots quickly, get them back to shore, rather like the old ambulances. I don't know if you're old enough like me, you can remember ambulances before paramedics used to bring the people in from picking them up at their homes or wherever it was. There wasn't much expertise in the ambulance, but it was a high-speed drive to get to the hospital. Obviously now paramedics are on the spot. Yes, there was a medical orderly on the boats, and you'll see about that later. But it would only be for basic. I mean, the main thing to do was to keep the crew warm, and warm them up and give them drinks and so on, warm drinks. So if we can get the next slide, please. As to where the air sea rescue boats went, and I should stress that there has been some form of air sea rescue since the First World War. It was just that after the shock of the Battle of Britain, that it was really put on a serious footing, and all sorts of meetings were had in London, and all sorts of divisions were created, as it were, to put it on a serious footing within Coastal Command, within the RAF. Clearly, besides the RAF, certainly previously, the Navy would pick up pilots from downed planes, and of course the lifeboat service. You know, we shouldn't forget what they did, and probably passing trawlers and things like that. So these would be the ladies, and just referring back to it was Sarah Louise, wasn't it? It was talking about the Dowding, referencing of air sea. She mentioned air sea rescue, in fact, and with her excellent presentation, I just thought I would put this in to show that it was important that the boats were sent to the right places. And so on the right, as we move through, that is pretty obviously the Blitz, which followed on pretty closely from the Battle of Britain. Next slide, please.
And effectively what you're saying, Steve, is there had been a system, but the system wasn't part of a greater efficiency system. It was rather haphazard and not connected. And as Sarah Louise explained about the whole Dowding system, it's about integrating all the bits we have, the radar, the observer corps, and the same thing with the air sea rescue, as you will go on to explain, is it's taking something that was already there but patchy and not working together, and people almost pulling in opposite direction, and then streamlining it so you have in a sense a one response unit that is dedicated to bringing these crews back and getting them back into action. So it's an evolution. It's rarely in the military. It's revolution. It's evolution. It's a process that is honed and improved and made better. And that's exactly, I think, the case with the air sea rescue. It's a development.
I really couldn't put that better myself. So fairly early in 1941, they were going to call it, I think, the Sea Rescue Service, but there was already, I think, a Navy that were using that term. So this was the Air Sea Rescue Service, and they had the motto, "The sea shall not have them," as in the video that I've just shown. And you can see the insignia, and it was put on on the bottom right there. So this was the beginning of what you say was an effective air sea rescue service. And since it started, the attrition rate went right down. They were able to pick up pilots and save them in much greater numbers. So it was great work. And bases all around the country. Behind me, I've got a map, but you might not be able to see it very well. So I've got...
Yeah, no, it's not very clear. We'll use the one on screen, yeah.
Can't see it very well. Anyway, it's a map of Britain. You can see that there is on the map on the south coast, obviously across the English Channel, and indeed the east coast, because later, obviously, you had the 8th Army, the USAAF, and their bombing raids going over from East Anglia. I think there are 100 bases in East Anglia, something like that. Phenomenal number. So the active areas, if you like, although if you show the whole, as I say, with the East Coast and the South Coast, but if you show the whole of the country, you can see the bottom part of England there. But it went right round Scotland, right round Northern Ireland, and indeed in time went round the world. And that needs emphasizing. So to the Far East, to I don't know, Bangladesh, Algeria, Malta. I have a whole list of spanning the globe, basically. Anywhere where there was a danger of our planes coming down, Allied planes coming down. Having said that, I will mention later on that it was more than just our plane pilots and aircrew that were rescued. Next slide, please. This, folk may or may not know, is one Lawrence of Arabia, otherwise known as Air Craftsman Shaw. In the 30s, he was serving in the RAF at Mountbatten in Plymouth. And we really have to go back to him to look at the development of the boats that I will describe later. This would have been one of the development boats. He had a big hand in the development of these various types of boats. So this would be an early development. This would be in the 30s when he served at Mountbatten, so before the war. And you can see there are thumping great engines in the back there, because if you want speed, you need big engines, and you'll hear about big engines a little bit later. So if we can go on to the next slide, please. So this is a recruitment on the left. You can see a recruitment drive. This is actually the British Powerboat Company advert, but it's also combined with saying join the RAF. Now, it may be that it's what my dad saw, I don't know, and he was inspired by it. What I should say is that he was a Salvation Army man, and the young people who joined up, he did join up at 19, were encouraged in the war to join up to, if they could, save lives rather than take them. And so you can see how the Air Sea Rescue Service, in my own father's case, he was a Sea Scout, and a keen Sea Scout at that. So that would have helped. But you can see the difficulty in recruitment for the RAF. They'd normally be looking for ground crew and all the other associated people that go with the air crew, of course. So now they're looking for people to go to sea. But fine people they did, and my father was amongst them. If you look at the middle picture, this would be a seaplane tender from the 30s, going out to the seaplanes like Sunderland and earlier planes. Fairly fast, about 40 foot long or so, a bit less than 40 foot long, but not fast enough. So we're talking around, and this would have been a development, this middle boat you're looking at, again by the British Powerboat Company from Southampton, Hythe. This would have been a development from the boat you were seeing Lawrence of Arabia, Air Craftsman Shaw on. So there's a development that goes on. The right-hand picture would have been the Bible, really, almost, for seamanship and signalling. And I think my dad remembered his flags and everything, you know, just throughout his life, really, you know, once learned, never forgotten. So it's Brown's signalling, which I have a copy of somewhere. So that would have been important, because clearly a lot of training had to go in for these crews to go to sea.
And frankly, multitasking as well. I mean, it's not just one skill you've got to have, because it's as we're going to find out, it's small crews. You've got to be involved in rescue, in navigation, at speed, making fast decisions. You know, that there's a first aid aspect. I know you said it's about getting them back to specialists, but you've still got to be able to, you know, do that administration administering of the first kind of care. So there's a lot of skills involved, and frankly, a willingness to go out to do this, because as you say, I'm liking already the fact you're emphasizing the saving of lives aspect, that they are in the military, they are in the RAF, but it's more of a, you know, so the medical branch. It's more of the angels of mercy rather than the creator of more death. You see what I mean? There's fighter pilots, there's these people here. It's more about a sense of compassion and the Samaritan nature, I think.
Yes, and I think to describe them as, I was going to say hospital ships, they're somewhat bigger, aren't they? Hospital boats, certainly. And at the beginning of the war, so in the 41, when the first boats took to the water under the Air Sea Rescue Service, it was assumed that under the Geneva Convention, they wouldn't be attacked, because they are indeed rescuing lives. Sadly, that was not the case, as we will see later. Can we have the next one, please?
Yep.
So here is the Type 1 boat, about 64 feet long, around 39 knots, made by the British Powerboat Company in Hythe. Actually, their factory burnt down right to the ground, I think, in the earlier 30s. And they just built a new factory and made these wooden boats. I have to stress wooden, and you'll hear a bit more about that later. So this is HSL 102. So in total, there were several dozen of these boats made, but this would be the first one. You can see that there's no armament on board. 64 feet long, around 39 knots. That's pretty darn fast. 38, 39 knots. They used aircraft engines, marinized Napier Sea Lions in this case, 500 horsepower each. So they were just going back to the seaplane tenders. They had a couple of 100 horsepower engines or the similar. This had 3 500 horsepower engines, Napier Sea Lions. So they shifted. They were extremely noisy. They were very vulnerable because the fuel was aircraft fuel. So you have aircraft fuel, you have a wooden boat made of teak, mahogany, and mahogany, I'll go into the construction later. And you had a floating bomb, basically. So these crews that went out were risking their lives anyway, really, going out. If the fuel had gone up, they had huge sort of around 1,000 gallon sort of fuel tank, massive fuel tanks in the bows. And I'll talk about the development of this, which was the Whaleback. If you could give me the next slide, please. Oh no, okay, we'll stick with this. This is more a cutaway. So you can see the various segments of the Type 1. You can see right at the back, stern, sorry, 3, again, thumping great engines, 500 horsepower each. This boat was hard chine construction and was designed to plane, rather like the Whaleback. In fact, the Whaleback even more so, the one that superseded it. You can see the chart room in the middle, because clearly charts were important for the skipper to make sure they went to the right place and the like. You can see, I think, excuse me, just inside on the port side. Are you all right with port and starboard, Paul?
Yeah, I am.
Okay, good man. Right, okay, yeah, that's it. You can see the wireless operator, the WOP, as they were known as. And you can see further down as you come towards the bow, you can see a more general area with bunks, accommodation, and so on, so they could take the injured in and indeed be accommodated themselves. And then I think right in the bow were the massive fuel tanks. So I'm grateful to my friend Colin York for this drawing. It's very useful.
It's very good.
So that's yeah, it's a very useful drawing. If I could go to the next slide, please. This is my dad's boat, or one of them, when he was based in Dover. Dover being one of the hairiest places to be to be based, not least because there was shelling that came across the channel, and it was known as Hellfire Corner. And if you can visualize the sort of bottom right-hand corner of Britain, that's basically Dover, Ramsgate. And when he wasn't at Dover, he was at Ramsgate. I think he went Ramsgate, then Dover. So this is the picture. And my dad is actually in that rear gun turret. The gun turrets were Vickers machine guns. Yeah. You can see one where he is, and you can see the other one just forward of the mast. It's a bit obscured, but there is another one there. You can see the sleek lines. You can see the sort of power that this thing is.
I have to say, I'm not a boaty person, but that does look very modern and sleek. That some of the stuff, when we're talking aircraft and tanks of 1940, 41, 42, kind of has now an antiquated feel about it. You know, we're pre-Mosquito, we're pre-Lancaster, we're the Comet tank. This looks like it wouldn't be out of place today.
No, it is amazing. I don't know whether you can put the camera on. This is an Airfix model that I'm currently building. Look at those lines. This is just the hull. But can you see why it'd be called a whaleback?
Yeah, yeah.
Sleek lines,
yeah.
Absolutely beautiful. So yes, so as I say, this was my dad's boat. This was out on a shout. By the looks of it, you can see the sea that's being kicked up by it. But can you also see that the hull is clear of the water? The bow is clear of the water. These things really shifted. 39 knots. What's that? 45 miles an hour. 45, 46, 47.
Yeah, that's going some. That's going some. You're going to feel that.
That's going faster than the cars of the day, I think.
Yeah.
Basically, that's one way of looking at it. So yes, you'll see quite a few whalebacks because they are my favourite. You also find out that I'm trying to get one restored. But anyway, that's another story that'll come later. Can we have the next slide, please, Paul? So beyond that was this, which was the Type 3 that came out of the same factory, the British Powerboat Company. This was affectionately known as the Hanson Dorset. Why, you might ask? It's because the Hanson Dorset was the local bus company in Southampton, and they thought that the superstructure looked a bit like a bus. You can see it is higher than the whaleback. So these came later in the war, and in fact they were so successful. They were also about 39 knots, something like that. I've got the figures here. Type 2, Type 3. Just excuse me. Hanson Dorset. We are 68 feet. Same power unit. Napier Sea Lion engines. Actually, no, they were slower. I've got that wrong. I'm corrected. 28 knots. So slower, but maybe looking at the superstructure, probably better arranged, better to accommodate injured pilots on stretchers, aircrew on stretchers. The manoeuvrability. I think getting the stretchers into those very sleek whalebacks was quite a problem. And as you say, all hands were needed. Interestingly enough, on this, you can see a big gun on the back. This just indicates this may be an Oerlikon Swiss-made 20mm. These were fitted subsequently to the whalebacks once they started getting attacked, as they did by the Germans. They had to beef up the armament, and these Oerlikon guns were fitted. This was a successful design, this Type 3. The other one wasn't unsuccessful, but this was the latest design. Went right through the war, through the 50s, really up to the 60s as the basic design. So that's the Type 3. You've got the Type 1, Type 2, and the Type 3. This is a Walrus. This is very slow. It was used in air sea rescue. They were based around, I think, mostly south coast and East Anglia. I don't know an awful lot about them. I have got a book. There's a book. I don't know whether you can.
Yeah, we had some people asking about some decent books. So what's the name of the author? Okay. I can't read that.
I'm going to give the bibliography a detailed bibliography on my Facebook group. Is that all right?
Yeah, sure. And by the way, folks, while we're on that subject, there are links to both of Steve's groups in the description below. So people are asking about books and further information. So I urge you to go and join those groups and get involved in this worthy project. Not only will you learn something, but you'll be able to helping out with these restorations projects that Steve will be talking about later. So we'll continue.
Yeah, sure. The Walrus. As I say, they're very slow. Notice that the propeller's at the back, so it's pushing. I think this is why it lends itself. You see, it's a biplane. This is why it lends itself to air sea rescue, because you don't really want to be nosing into aircrew on a raft with propellers heading towards you, as you can imagine. So that was a safety aspect. The big disadvantage of the Walrus was it needed a fairly calmish sea to take off. And there were many occasions where the Walrus would land to pick up air crew but not be able to take off because the sea had got rougher, in which case the good old Whaleback or the good old air sea rescue boats would tow it back to harbour, and that happened quite a lot. They could take less numbers, obviously, because you've got a small cabin, you've got 2 air crew. They could take a couple of people on board, maybe 3, but much beyond that, and the engine just wouldn't lift the plane off the sea. So they worked in conjunction with the boats, and they would often converge at an incident that had been flagged up by the headquarters. This is Flying Fortress B-17. I put this here because just being slightly personalised again, my dad told a story. He didn't tell many stories, believe me, until just before he died. I'll tell you a bit more about that later. But he did say that when he was out in the North Sea on one occasion, they rescued the entire crew, uninjured, of a Flying Fortress. Well, a bomber coming down, to have the entire crew survive is a minor miracle for a start. But not only that, when he approached it, it was still afloat. So the crew walked off the wing onto their boat, virtually, almost with dry feet. The crew were fine. In gratitude, the American crew, of course, so we're talking later in the war now, of course, when the Americans were involved and flying from the East Coast, were the captain of the Flying Fortress gave my dad one of his insulated suits, the flying suits, known as a bunny suit, I believe. I did a little bit of research on it. Obviously unpowered, but I know that my mum wore it in the air raid shelters in the war in East London, and I can just recall seeing it. I can't find it now, but I can recall seeing it. I checked with an aunt, an elderly aunt, she's 90. That's my mum's sister, and she does definitely recall it. So, you know, it did happen. I would love to know where this B-17 came down, and it's an ongoing project of mine to try and find it. And obviously, you've got a crew of what, 8 or 10 on a Flying Fortress?
10 on the B-17. Well, it depends if it's an B-17 Air4G, but yeah, 9 or 10.
Okay. I bow to your expertise on that, Paul. But we're talking about a biggish life raft, as you can see. And I think that's a wonderful picture. I think it's a great image, it shows big, rough seas, which is what we're talking about. Sorry, next slide, please.
And I want to bring, because there's already been a couple of questions, Steve, about how aircrew pilots were equipped to deal with a forced landing. Of course, that is obviously going to be a discussion in its own right, because we're talking about at what point in the war, what aircraft are they in, and so on and so forth. But it seems to me logical that if you're going to invest in a system to recover pilots with boats and aircraft and technology, you need to also brief the air crews on what is expected of them before and if they go in the water. So, you know, we know they have life jackets usually, whether in a single-seater Spitfire or Hurricane. But beyond that, what was your average pilot equipped with at the beginning of the war, and maybe what at the end of the war? Was there improved technology? I mean, I know there's little lights they have on their life jackets like we would have today on if you go, you know, when you do your flight instructions on an aircraft. But if you know a little bit about it, run us through a little bit about some of the preparations the crew would make.
Right. Well, with the fighters, obviously a single pilot, you would have a smallish dinghy. You would have possibly, you see the thing on the right?
Yeah.
This was bought in. This is a transmitter that hasn't got batteries as such, but what it does here is a handle on it to generate a signal, an SOS signal, to be picked up by passing aircraft or ships. And here is one, if you want to show camera.
Yeah.
This is mine, which I managed to pick up on eBay. It's got a quite difficult to operate handle, but they would have to do that continuously and then press a button to alert passing ships or planes. Inside this door, if you can see this door, there is a reel. And on that reel is electrical cable to fly an aerial, because the other thing that came with this was a kite. And the idea was the box kite. Do you remember box kites?
Yeah.
Yeah. They would be flown with the aerial attached. And obviously, the higher you could get that cable,
the better the signal.
I speak as a former electronic engineer. The better the coverage, as you can imagine. But it's very heavy. It's very heavy. It's known as a Gibson girl because I don't know whether you want to show it. Oh, well, you can see the still picture, which is fine. Named after a girl called Gibson, I think in the 30s, maybe the 20s. And I hardly dare say it, but it's the shape, basically, the hourglass type.
Let's just say it's curvy. Yeah, that's it. We'll leave it at that. I mean, which, of course, connects us to the Mae West life jacket, also named for similar reasons. Yeah.
Okay, I think we'll move on from there. The reason for the curves practically is because it was held between the knees. It's so heavy, you need to hold it between the knees and then wind it. If you get the idea, you see this fella here. If you zoom, you see he's holding it between his knees.
Yeah.
So it makes it more comfortable. Bearing in mind these pilots could well be injured, but it makes it more doable, if you like, while they're turning this handle. And if you watch, I think it's Sea Shall Not Have Them. You will see the crew, because there's quite a lot of shots of, well, there's a lot of the film basically with the downed crew. Is it from a Hudson? Is that right? I think it might have been a Hudson.
Maybe. Yeah.
Anyway,
someone watched it a couple of weeks ago. They'll tell us, because someone who started it saying they watched it just recently, so they'll tell us which aircraft it is. I can't remember. It's been a while since I've seen it.
I'm gonna put my life on the line and say it's a Hudson. Anyway, whatever it was, you will see them operating this, and it's quite a prominent part of the film, and it's quite something to see it. So that's the transmitter. This is dated 1944, my own one here, and I'm very pleased to have it. Believe me, there aren't that many about. My wife said to me, "What have you got that for?" Bless her. It's just going to take up room. Yes, but it's no. She does understand how important it is to me.
And two people have confirmed it was a Hudson in the films. That's it. We've had confirmation it's a Hudson.
Oh, excellent. Okay. Oh, we've got a listener, a watcher.
We've got three who confirm that. No, viewing numbers are quite good. I'm happy.
Oh, okay. Right. Okay. Good. Okay. Now this might not have occurred. I think particularly in the bombers, they would load pigeons, a couple of pigeons. The idea being that they could be released with the details attached to their legs, and of course they're homing pigeons. And these were used on a number of occasions. Sadly, in I think quite a large number of cases, the pigeons drowned. You can imagine the melee of a plane coming down in the sea. You can imagine the scramble. You can imagine the life of a pigeon is going to be pretty low down, basically. In the pecking, dare I say pecking order?
Pecking order. Dear. Yeah, pun of the day, Steve. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, that was accidental. But we'll move on to the next slide. So the crew would scramble, much like the Spitz and the Hurricane crews, really. They would be, I'm still trying to research this. It's not easy to find information, but and it's information I couldn't get a lot out of, or indeed from my dad, and he told me quite a lot in the end. I think they were in barracks that were pretty close to the boats in harbour, in places like Dover, Ramsgate, New Haven, wherever, Galston, Grimsby, and so on, Mountbatten and the like. On occasions, they did sleep. I think when they were expecting a lively night or a lively day or whatever it was, they did sleep on board so they could get away that much quicker, because speed was of the essence. Next slide, please, Paul. Yeah, another excuse to show the Whaleback 142 flying along. Look at the the clearance, as it were, on the bow there. Very much a planing boat. And so, yeah, can we have the next one, please? Other methods. Besides sending a sea rescue boat, or indeed a walrus, or both, or the pigeons. If you look at the left picture, It's a fuzzy picture, but it shows again a flying fortress, I think, with a huge tail.
Yep.
I reckon that's a flying fortress.
Yep,
yeah,
definitely.
American
Yep.
flying fortress. And a Lindome lifeboat being dropped. This would be equipped with transmitter, food, flares, all the things you need, basically. Provisions, obviously, some medical aid and so on. So what would happen was a light bomber would carry this underneath. It depends where the incident occurred, but would then drop it right by the downed crew. And then clearly that would be better than floating around in a rubber boat, because they. And then on the right is the floating rescue buoy. Now this was actually a leaf taken from the Germans. As in a number of occasions, it has to be said, we kind of picked up on what the Germans did first of all. That might be a controversial thing to say. But they had their own air sea rescue service and so on, and they were first to come up with the idea of having buoys moored in the English Channel, fixed buoys, and clearly they were wonderful refuges. The idea of being that they would put in the way along the path of likely flights, and if you were to come down in the sea by one of those, then it would be like Christmas, because once you're in there, it's warm, it's dry, there's food, there's provisions, there's flares, there's transmitter, medical supplies, and so on, and you'd be pretty safe. So there's a number of these, one of which has been preserved and apparently is in the Scottish Maritime Museum, I learned recently, in Irvine, which I'd love to go and see. So that's the floating rescue buoy, of which I think about a dozen were made, something like that. They weren't used that often, because when you think about it, what are the chances of a plane coming down just, at that spot?
Yeah, you'd have to have so many of them to give any kind of coverage. It's I can understand why they focused on the getting a aircraft and or boat to a specific location is easy, which is why there's so much about the communication. The pilot who knows he's going to go down, it's down to him to try and get that information out about where he is so that he can speed up the process. I like the fact we're emphasizing that it's a chain, it's a process. There's the aircrew themselves, there's boats, there's aircraft, there's a light bomber that potentially drops a raft, all of it coming together, because if your chance to survive is based on a large number of people, and I think that's important to emphasize.
Yes, indeed. Could we have the next slide, please, Paul? So this would be the skipper looking at his charts to find out. Let's assume we've had a shout by whatever method, but this is a boat going out, one of the rescue boats, whether it's a whaleback, type 1, or a type 3, or whatever it was. And I think I said before that it must be borne in mind that the Navy also rescued pilots, and so did the RNLI and so on. I think it's worth emphasizing that. So yeah, the skipper. This is Flying Officer Lockwood, whose son lives in Cheltenham, and he was awarded the DSC for a particular rescue he did. So there aren't. The problem with air sea rescue is there aren't that many photographs. They're all black and white, pretty well. Some have been colorized. But I've tried to draw all the ones I can. So what you're seeing is, I hope, representing what I want to say. The picture on the right, the photo on the right, again, is a real life situation taken from a plane, clearly, and shows I think it's a whaleback. Yeah, it is a whaleback actually approaching. I don't. Can we zoom in a little bit on that, Paul? The one on the right, is that possible?
Yep, there we go.
Oh, that's excellent. 14. Can you see the number 139?
139 or 130, possibly.
Oh, 130. Okay, right. But clearly, yes, you see 130 on the deck. Yes, you can on the deck. That's right. And you can also see the old life raft that they carried. You can see the life raft at the top. Yes, that's right. Which would be the incident they were approaching. So that would have the pilot's aircrew or whatever. So this is a good picture. It's real life. Next slide, please, Paul. Again, Flying Officer Lockwood. This, I think, shows, in a sense, the nitty-gritty. You're out there in the middle of the English Channel or the North Sea or wherever it is, the boat's floundering around in the waves and everything, and you've got to get this poor fella on board. And you can see, you mentioned, Paul, earlier that it is multitasking, really, by the crew. The deckhands, of which my father was a deckhand, were referred to as deckhand gunners. So they took their turn in the gun turret to, if they were under attack. But all hands would be, you had nets, but they would be turned to the task of plucking the aircrew, pilot, whoever it was, out of the dinghy in the safest possible way, so as not to do extra damage. Remember, this boat, it has a fairly high freeboard, so it's not just a question of reaching down a few inches, sort of thing. And it was quite a task.
And
but,
of course, if the weather conditions are bad, the crew have a harder job because everything is made worse because of pitching and rolling on waves, and also it's compounded by the fact, presumably, if it's bad weather, the crew's chances in the water are lessened because there's water swamping over their life craft, or if they're on a personal life. So that with that photo there, clearly it looks a bit like a mill pond in the background there. I mean, that's obviously a good day for a rescue in that it looks fairly calm, but I can only imagine how much more tense it got when the weather conditions were worse.
It's interesting you say mill pond, because that is exactly the phrase that my dad used. He said just occasionally he would see the English Channel like a mill pond, and that's what they wanted to see.
Yeah,
as you could occasionally, exactly. Vast majority of the time, not.
Yeah.
Next slide, please, Paul. This, I think, emphasizes the fact that humanity is humanity. So rescuing injured pilots, aircrew, didn't distinguish between which side. I don't know what the numbers were of picking up Germans, but I know my father picked up some Germans. And I think this is a good opportunity to just thank Victoria for what she was saying about the Luftwaffe the other day. I was fascinated to hear the talk about, because we never think about the other side, do we?
We don't in terms of individuals. We think about the Luftwaffe as a kind of an organization, and the black crosses on the aircraft. But it was interesting and quite amazing to hear about them as people going in with fears and trepidation. I think that was what made Victoria's talk so amazing for me.
Yeah, it was great, and both her and Sarah Louise, it was wonderful to see the two. Can I call them youngsters at my age? Taking such an
interest. I guess you can, yeah. I mean, Victoria's 26. Yeah, I mean, it's amazing. Yeah, it's.
I mean, they're 2 generations away from the greatest generation. I'm only 1.
Yeah, no, I know the feeling. It's good. It's wonderful there are young people carrying these things forward, because not only is it better for the future, they're bringing their perspectives of having been trained in a different era with a lot more resources available to them. And I want to give credit to you, Steve, because you've said a couple of times how difficult it is researching this. If I wanted to have someone on court and come on and talk about a particular mark of Spitfire, they could have 30 books they could draw on with cutaway diagrams, the whole lot. I appreciate that the whole study of air sea rescue. Okay, there's some gripping accounts of pilots who are rescued, but putting together the actual meat and potatoes of a presentation like this, kudos to you for building it together when there isn't really a huge amount of resources out there.
That's very kind of you. I think, to my knowledge, I think I was able to scrape together literally half a dozen books, including ones that don't deal with boats, if you like. The one that I showed you.
Yeah.
I will publish the. Well, maybe I'll show you a couple while we're talking about books.
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah. Okay. This is almost like the Bible. It's a pen and sword. They do a lot of them, and this is the first book. No, it isn't. It's the second book I read, and it gives a good overview.
But of course, it's covering 70 odd years, so it's not focused purely on World War II.
It is. I mentioned the very first book I managed to get hold of because when I got into this, I knew nothing. I do mean nothing. So the first book I read was this, Crash Boats of Galston. Galston being actually featured on a camper van with Paul Merton program recently. Galston. I didn't realise it was a seaside town, but anyway, it's near Great Summer,
isn't it?
Yeah, Tony Overall. So that was very good. And the Shot Down in the Drink is another one. I don't know if you can see that.
Yeah.
But there are literally just 6, I think. This is an interesting one that I discovered, just going back, Paul. Sorry. This is about really relating to what Sarah Louise was talking about. And it was the girls or ladies who accurately got the locations of the pilots that were in trouble.
Brilliant.
And
Super stuff.
So I was very glad to get that one. Mayday, calling Mayday.
And it was mentioned already in the chat. Or a couple of these books were mentioned already in the sidebar. There's some knowledgeable people watching. So anyway, we have a slide with an operations page.
We do. ORB, known as an ORB, Operation Record Book. I had known for some time. One of the results you talked about trying to get information. One of them is the National Archives.
Yeah.
In Kew. About the time I was looking into all this, it was before COVID, but by the time I got round to seriously looking at the National Archives, COVID had hit, and I had to take a flyer. I did some searches on Dover, found out there were ORBs for Dover. They were when my dad was serving there. It's a fearfully complicated process to go to the National Archives online. You have to, I think you pay about £8 or something to find out if they can copy it, and then they come back with a price, and you have no idea what the price is. So if the price is ridiculous, you've paid your £8 and it's gone. And so, anyway, I did this and it cost me about £30 or something. So I got a number of pages, but this particular page is about Dover, but it emphasizes how the boats were attacked. I had tried, it was very poor quality, believe me, when it arrived online. So I tried to kind of increase the contrast and everything. But very basically, this was about Hellfire Corner again, that area off Dover, so Ramsgate, New Haven, where I think it was a 109 attacked a ASR rescue boat and virtually destroyed it. It was on fire. Another boat went out, another ASR rescue boat, to take the crew on board. That itself was attacked, and there was quite a great loss of life. Is it 122 HSL 122? HSL, I should say, is high speed launch. Stands for
HSL 140 and HSL 138, and it was a Focke-Wulf 190 or several Focke-Wulf 190s. It says.
Okay, well there you go. Okay, but basically you can see the hazard. Yeah, you can see it really came across to me when I looked into this. Just, well, I don't know how my dad came through serving this service basically, and obviously grateful for it. So there's a number of these pages on my group that you can access, and I'm very happy to send any information I have to anybody who takes a serious interest. I think a free flow of information, which to a certain extent I found difficult because there's lots of asking permissions and so on, but for anything I get, anybody else can have.
No, it's good. I urge people to go and check this out because it's a good resource. So we're moving forward.
So we're talking about being attacked. This clearly shows the Oerlikon gun, the 20mm at the back, which they started to fit around. I will refer to it again as Hellfire Corner. This is actually 156, which was based, I think, mostly at New Haven, and in fact under Flying Officer Lockwood. But if nothing else, there you can see the Oerlikon gun. You can see the two Vickers guns turrets. Incidentally, the turrets look rather like those on Lancaster bombers, don't they?
Yeah, there was there was discussion on whether they're from Blenheims. Obviously, they're a recycle from something.
Maybe Blen. Yeah. I could go with that. Yeah, but certainly off an aircraft.
Yeah. I'd imagine it'd be something earlier because Blenheim it seems to be the best guess amongst the aviation nuts earlier. So we've got a close up of a photo later on. They can maybe hone in on it when we get to that.
Okay, so this shows the whaleback line, doesn't it? Beautifully, that beautiful sweep. It's it's amazing. Thanks. I'm in awe of it.
Yeah, beautiful. Well, here we are. Here's the photo of the turret. Yeah, there we go. So there's the crew. Yeah. Or there's the position. Sorry.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so if I deal with the one on the left first, this shows a whaleback. You can see that the radio operator, the little chap sitting there by the two number ones, as it were, is different to the Type 1. He's more forward in his little cabin there. I don't know, you can see the engines, or you can see where the engines go. You can certainly see the gun turrets. Yes, as I say, the fuel would have been in the bow. Yes, you can see the engines. So 1,500 horsepower of engine. That's a lot of engine. Actually, fuel compartment is midships by the looks of it on that. Yeah, it is. Right. Okay, I stand corrected.
Armstrong Whitworth Whitley turrets apparently is the verdict from Kevin Hughes on the sidebar there. So there we go.
Oh, I'm grateful. I'm very grateful. It's not my expertise, but thank you for that. I'll add that to my knowledge base. That's wonderful. And then on the right, this is taken sort of behind one of the Vickers turrets or whatever they are. Did you say Whitworth? Vickers?
Whitley.
Whitley machine guns. But to the right, sorry, that's the left. And you can see someone's in it. Not my dad in this case, but on the right, you can see the Oerlikon gun, this 20mm precision, very well made, very highly respected and accurate 20mm machine gun. You can see the plates. See the plates? The big plate, the armor plate to protect, obviously, the gunner. Talking of the gunner, I said to as my dad took his turn at the guns, I said to him, "Well, did you hit it?" You know, as a kid, I seem to remember one of the things I asked him was, no. In fact, I say as a kid, I was a big kid, so not that long ago. But I said to him, "Did you ever hit anything?" He said, "No, not a chance." He said, You're sitting on a boat that's wallowing around. You know, it's hardly a stable platform like on a naval boat. Not a chance." And I think he was rather glad he didn't. Next slide, please. Yeah. Okay, so this is looking at the various positions. Clearly, the top left is the wheelhouse. So the cocks or the skippers at the wheel. You've got three, right, like an aircraft, really. Paddles, as it were, to bring the engines up. Then below him, you've got the unsung engineer, fitter. I speak as a retired engineer myself. He's sitting on one of the engines, virtually. There are three of them, extremely noisy. And if you were to watch, I think it's The Sea Shall Not Have Them. I think that's one of those two videos we were talking about, films we were talking about. There's quite a comic situation where the engineer fitter is sitting in that position and he's singing away. No one can hear a word he's singing, but he's still singing away to his heart's content. And I think that just emphasizes
the noise.
The noise, because you've got big engines. And of course, the wireless operator, I think this particular wireless operator must have been in the tropics. And obviously
and emphasizing the importance of communication, because the boat being able to go fast is one thing, but without knowing where to go and being able to give updates and receive updated information, it's the surface is blind effectively.
That's right. An extremely important position. And the one message all the crew wanted to hear was RTB. RTB is return to base. And you can imagine why. Okay, this is a real life situation with a rescue going on. This is a whaleback again. I make no apology for all these whalebacks. But I think what comes across from this picture is the dirt and the grime, if you like, and the real grit of the situation. It's not a polished situation at all. You know, you've probably got a dirty boat. You've got all the fumes, you know, from the engine and so on. You've got tired crew, and you know, just like I say, the grit of the situation. So I'd rather.
And that's a very good point to make, because when we talk out on Allport later about the popular memory of the Battle of Britain, we think of the pilots in the Spitfires and the Hurricanes with their cravats and their you know, their shiny shoes and their slicked back hair. But an aspect we don't think about is the dirtiness of these guys on these boats going out there in all weathers, and the sea, the spray from the sea, and the salt and the oil and the grime, and then pulling guys out of the water and then getting them back. This is far from glamorous. But it's absolutely essential to the smooth functioning of the Royal Air Force. Yeah,
that's right. And as I say, your average Joe in the street has no idea what SC Rescue did in the war. So I'm trying to do my bit to put that right. Next slide, please, Paul. This is from 1944. Is it September? So later on in
August
the war.
44.
August, okay, August. And these are incidents. So these are plottings of incidents. So my dad would have been on some of those out in the. You can see on the North Sea there. Obviously, the North Sea, 44, you've got the American planes going over, coming back from bombing raids and the like into Germany, and of course Lancaster bombers, and going over to bomb dams and all the rest of it. That's another show.
Yeah, and I want to draw people's attention there to the figures there. Total crew rescue, 232. So in 1 month of 1944, you know, and we could argue whether that's a busy month or a quiet month, but it is absolutely getting across that this isn't just a few here and there. This is hundreds. So over the course of the war, we're talking many hundreds being rescued by this service.
We're actually talking. This figure is a fairly well documented figure, that it's reckoned that 13,000 lives were saved over the course of the war worldwide.
Good grief. Amazing.
It's staggering, isn't it?
Yeah, brilliant stuff. And moving on to, you know, again with maps, and this is just B-17 crashes. So you know, because you emphasize the fact that these crews are going out and they're not, you know, they're also picking up Luftwaffe, but this is multi-service. This is British, American. The B-17s are part of the American 8th Air Force, and so this is an international service as well.
Yeah, very much so. This is something I came across recently. Again, I'll put details on the Facebook group, but this is a gentleman, I can't remember the name now, it's unpronounceable anyway. But anyway, he has been looking at Flying Fortress crashes and actually documented where they were. And I need to get back in contact with this man, because I think this is an amazing work, terrific. So I will pursue that.
Yeah. And now we're getting to kind of towards the what your work these days, and the construction of the boats and what you're up to, because this, you know, when we think of World War II, we think of aluminium and gadgets, and you know, as you said, this is teak and wood. So yeah, that's a great shot. That.
Yeah, this is obviously a boat under restoration. Whether it's a whaleback or a Type 1, I don't know, but it's called Double Diagonal. Here's one I did earlier, 80 years old again. I don't know whether the camera can see. Can you see the plates going that way and that way? And that gave the strength. That gave the strength. And in between was oiled calico. And that was basically the construction of the hull. This is actually off a boat we tried to rescue recently. So you ended up with, they were mahogany. And I think the deck was mostly teak, not, you know, extremely difficult woods to get hold of now, I think. But like I say, you had a wooden boat, you had thousands of gallons of fuel, and aircraft fuel. So they were floating bombs, but they were amazingly knocked out in considerable numbers by the British Powerboat Company. These tickets exist for most of, well, they did originally exist for all of the boats. Whalebacks, we're talking about 69 were ever made, air sea rescue whalebacks. This is 144, my dad's boat in Grimsby, and I was very fortunate to get a hold of this because it shows its movement, basically. You can see at various dates. As with a lot of wartime dockets, as it were, they're scribbles. They don't exactly go in for big block capitals and so on, or certainly not printing, and typing was pretty basic then anyway. And so you get scribbles out and all sorts of things, and changes and edits and amendments. However, you can see through that the idea is to trace where they went, because they got moved around between bases as need arose and as the war progressed. A little story on that, if you've got time for it, is that my dad had the job of moving Whaleback with the crew from Felixstowe to Padstow. That is one heck of a long sea trip. And I said to him, well, how was that then? He said it was great once we got past Hellfire Corner. And he said we tried to string it out. It was so, once they got to safer zones, as it were, as they got down to Cornwall and the like, they tried to stay at sea as much as they could, or they tried to string it out, and mysteriously they kept having to put into repairs at various ports. That's what he told me, anyway.
Brilliant stuff.
just kept the voyage going. This is my friend Des Knock, artist, and this is really to emphasise that in the Dieppe raids, they positioned the air sea rescue boats along the lines of the pathways of the returning, the going and coming back planes, and so the idea being that they were on station to pick up any that came down. So
which
what they did is
Sorry, what you were saying a minute ago about the fact the stations move as the war goes on. If so, presumably in May and June, lots of stuff around the bottom south coast of Britain. When you get towards the bombing of Germany, more around the east coast. The upgrade of 42, it's opposite. They're moving this commodity around to try and match up with where the maximum amount of air operation is going to be taking, which of course, as we know, is not consistent as the war goes on because of the needs.
No, that's absolutely right. Yes, the attention moved to the North Sea, and the North Sea is a big place and needed a lot of boats, and sadly a lot of planes came down in the North Sea, not least as you can see from that chart we were looking at. I did say at the beginning I'm not an expert. This chap is Terry Holtham, and he has written a definitive guide to whalebacks, which I think is going under reprint or something at the moment. And then on the right is a colorization, because there are no color pictures of, is that 164? I think it's 164. Yeah. Again, you can see daylight under the hull, that just, under the bow. It just emphasizes the speed. There are other, Donald Smith is another acknowledged expert, and Peter Scott, Stephen Fisher, people like that. People who know far more than me. And I've been grateful to learn from them. Can we have the next slide, please?
Yep.
This is, you saw right at the beginning when I said about the Type 1, HSL 102. This is HSL 102 today. It's in Portsmouth. It was restored by Phil Clabburn over previous years. He did a magnificent job. It's now in the ownership of the, let me get this right, is it the Portsmouth Historic Maritime Boats Trust or something like that down in Portsmouth? And you can charter it, and I did for my dad on his 90th birthday, and it was wonderful. 3 hours of absolute amazing bliss on a gorgeously hot day in August. I'll never forget it. And I think it was obviously great for him, and I had most of my family on board. Price-wise, I could have gone on a cruise for what it cost me for those 3 hours, but I'm glad that
it's like those 15-minute flights people pay for in a Mustang. You know, it's price per minute. It's insane, but the memory will last a lifetime. I believe I saw 102 parked up in the canal at Pegasus Bridge for the 70th or something, or the 75th. I believe it was there, 65th possibly.
It was. And in actual fact, just going back a bit, previously, a few years previously, when I was getting into all this, I tried to charter it only to find out the engines had broken and they had to replace them. So I thought, oh dear, that's a shame. That would have been a nice thing to do. Anyway, it all went quiet. And then I happened to be, do you remember the Queen's Flotilla on the Thames for the Diamond Jubilee? Was it the Diamond? 2012?
Probably, yeah. I don't. Yeah, 2020. I don't know whether you follow the monarchy, but anyway, it was a magnificent. The Dunkirk little ships were there and everything. And guess what went by? HSL 102. So I thought, right, it's got its engines. It's got its new engines. So I immediately got onto them when I got home and chartered it. And just to give you an idea, I don't know whether you can show the camera on that. Yeah,
it is so beautifully restored. Absolute beauty to see it out on the Solent.
Yeah,
and we had a helicopter. Yeah, go on.
And in its own way, equally as beautiful as a Spitfire or the Lancaster, or whatever people's thing of choice from World War II, be it armored vehicles, motorbikes, aircraft, to people who like this side of it, that is as beautiful to look at as any of the aircraft, and it's all part of the same story. It's important what work you're doing.
Okay, yeah, thanks. Okay, can we have next slide, please? The reason I'm showing this is because, again, you can see the whaleback lines of this, but this is I will be shot down, no doubt, if I've got this wrong, but I think it's a motor anti-submarine, MASB, motor anti-submarine boat, which was made by the British Powerboat Company. It used an identical hull, and there are examples of this restored, but not the air-sea rescue version. Next slide, please. This, I mentioned the Hanson Dorset. This is at Hendon, the RAF Museum at Hendon. Sadly, it's out in the open. Not the best place for it. There is a bit of a push now to get the RAF. Let me say something about the RAF. I think RAF at sea, they've never been quite sure about what to do about maritime things, the RAF, bless them. And I think that was instanced by, do you remember when we had the 100 Years of the RAF book that came out? Not a mention of air rescue in there, not one. And that was sad. Obviously, lots of planes, lots of bombers, lots of fighters, lots of this, that, yeah. So this is Hendon, which I've been to see, but yeah, Hanson Dorset, very clear, the lines of that. So that's the Hanson Dorset, that's the Type 1. This is a whaleback. This is out in Spain somewhere. One of the very, very few that I can locate. And believe me, I'm on a world search for a restorable whaleback. More about that later. Next slide, please. This is one that's too far gone. This is on the Blackwater estuary. It's HSL 145, which I went to see recently. It's obviously the bigger boat behind with the big gash in it. But this is an air-sea rescue whaleback, HSL 145. It's on Mersey Island, right by the lifeboat station.
I know that area very well. Being a Colchester lad, I know Mersey Island very well.
Oh, okay, right, okay. Well, just in case we got people from a little further afield, I thought I'd try and put it into context. That's beyond. That's not. It is beyond. Yeah. I've been in it up to my knees in mud because a lot of mud around there. That was an amazing experience, but it clearly is beyond it. You can see the double diagonal.
Yeah, you can see the construction. Yeah.
I don't know whether you can go onto camera. I rescued someone who lives nearby, sent me a piece of memorabilia. That's a piece of 145.
Souvenir, yeah.
Souvenir, yeah, exactly. Next slide, please. Now, the one on the left, is the most recent one we tried, or the only one we've tried to rescue, the Whaleback restoration group. I'm in contact with a very experienced maritime boat, World War II and I boat restorer, who has restored a number of boats. He's a marine surveyor called Bob.
Oh, just think we might have lost Steve's audio for a second there. You still there, Steve? Oh, Steve seems to have frozen for a second.
This on the south coast.
We had your audio froze for a second, Steve. So whatever
okay.
you were saying,
all right, I'll carry
we got
on,
as far as your friend Paul Popham, and then we lost you. So carry on from there.
Okay. Bob Morley, marine surveyor and World War I and World War II boat restorer. If I can just give you a little bit idea about Bob, I've met him fairly recently, but he has restored, would you believe, a World War I know we're not a World War I channel, drone boat called CMB-9, and he's restored various other World War II boats. So this was a drone boat that was, the idea was that it was controlled from 5 miles away in an aeroplane. This is World War I, amazingly. Anyway, he knows what he's doing. He knows his onions, does Bob. And this is on the south coast, and we had hired a huge crane, as you can see, to lift this thing with enormously wide strops. It was totally waterlogged, and there what we're trying to do is we're trying to drain the water out. You can imagine how much heavier. These boats with the superstructure in the day were 20 tons. An estimate of how heavy this would be 8 tons to lift. It's a big crane, huge crane. It clocked it at 16, double. So we're just talking about the sheer waterloggedness, basically, because this is a waterlogged, I was going to say wreck, was restorable. I'll cut a long story short. We didn't get an awful lot of cooperation from either the owner or the yacht club. And so in the end, it got chopped up and literally chopped up. And I have, again, if we can go back to camera, I have a bit. I managed to rescue an armful of pieces. And you see the paint, see the yellow paint?
We got it. Yeah, yellow paint.
Original paint from 80 years ago. So sadly, that wasn't to be. If I carry on talking much more about that, I'll cry, because
I know. I was following. For those who maybe are following, the saga was getting all a bit. We'll gloss over it, but I was following that early this year, and it's just sad that a project like this ends up, not getting anywhere. But we'll move on to the positive side of things.
Onwards and upwards, we are looking for another one, and we think we might have found one. But anyway, we're looking at that. This is a little museum, quite a small museum in a field, in port cabins, in sort of old hangars and things, and it's on the Norfolk-Suffolk border, and it's at Bungay, the Flixton
Good old Bungay.
Museum.
Yeah, I know it very well.
Yeah. Well, I love it. I love that museum. I went there, and there is a whole, I think, 2 porter cabins devoted solely to ASR, and that is very rare in RAF museums, believe me, or air museums. And also someone on duty who can talk knowledgeably as well. So I highly recommend it. It's in the middle of nowhere. Bungay, it's a name you can probably remember. I think David Wright was the resident historian at the time, so I highly recommend that.
Brilliant.
My dad and my son on board HSL 102. Do you remember I said about that trip on the Solent?
Yeah.
Memorable for both, I think. And we actually had a helicopter, a Coast Guard helicopter, pass us and drop a man on board while we were at speed. We found out later, because they wanted to practice landing on the boat at speed. He didn't know there was a real veteran on board, the man who was winched down. And you can imagine that was a great meeting. But when he was on his way back and being winched up, just before he got winched up, he said, we got a pretty good camera in the helicopter. He says, we're going to take pictures. We're going to fly around the boat, and we're going to take pictures of you lot. And then here's my email address. I'll send them to you. So I've got some wonderful pictures of that trip.
Fantastic stuff.
Yeah, memorable day. This is a still, I think, well, on the left is 144, my dad's boat from Grimsby. I just randomly put that in, really. I'm showing 3 boats. I think this is a still from, I think, which one? It's one of those boats, one of those films we were talking about. I think Sea Shall Not Have Them, I think. I'm not certain. I'll have to. It's a good excuse to re-watch, isn't it?
Yeah, re-watch the film. It's always there's never enough excuses for re-watching war films. Yeah, brilliant stuff.
That's absolutely right. And I find Talking Pictures is a good. If I can put a little plug in for them, I'm nothing to do with them, but they seem to come out with some good war films. Excellent.
They are.
I love this picture. This is a real veteran, just like my dad. And look how he's looking lovingly at that whaleback. It must be bringing memories flooding back for him. And I don't know who the gentleman is. I don't know whether he's alive today. I'm not even sure when it was taken. But I think it sums up the veterans, if you like, and why we're doing what we're doing. If we do get to restore a boat, then I guess it'd be too late because they're in their late 90s. So what I would emphasize is we must remember them. You know, we've got that famous thing with the Army, the Navy, and the Air Force. But in particular, the whaleback. So you can see the whaleback restoration group there, which is dedicated to doing exactly that. We're looking currently at a boat in the Broads that is not an air sea rescue boat, but it's an MASB, motor anti-submarine boat. It's waterlogged at the moment. I'm in delicate negotiation with the owner, who started to restore it. I won't say exactly where it is, but it's on the Broads, and I hope to bring good news. If we do get it, it has the identical hull. We will build the air sea rescue structure onto it, and it will then become the only air sea rescue whaleback in the world. Simple as that.
And this is the thing. I mean, the news about Spitfires being restored, makes the front page of daily newspapers and TV shows and Sky News and things, and that the thing about the hunt for the Spitfires in Burma a few years ago. And I would venture to say that the air sea rescue boats are as important to our memory of and collective understanding of the victory in World War II as the Spitfire, as anything else. And yet people like yourself have seen this history just gradually, literally rot away over the years. And you can go and see a Spitfire in probably most countries in the world now, even if it's just replicas hanging from the ceilings of museums and things. And yet this integral part of the victory, where, as you said earlier, 13,000 lives, and estimated that 13,000 lives saved in World War II, is kind of in danger of being forgotten, and it's a tragedy. So I urge people to kind of get in touch with you and find out what they can do to help. And we got one more image to go, which you threw at me at the last minute there, and about the Salvation Army again. We started with the Salvation Army, so.
Yeah, I mentioned my dad was in the Salvation Army. He spoke fondly of the Red Shield Club. They provided canteen facilities, rest facilities for troops all over the country and indeed the world. My dad was sent out to Burma, where Red Shield were as well. And although it's not part of the sequence, if you like, because I only found this yesterday, and I've been searching for anything on Red Shield for a long time. I know they're in Dover. This is in Dover, and in fact, I think it was shelled. I think it had a hard time. But you can see, if you look carefully, you can see there are RAF types there with their they're called forage caps.
There's a little caps there, and what we got there. Yeah. I think little chip bags. There's a beret there as well. Yeah, no, it's important to emphasise this again. This collective nature. It's not just the air sea rescue. It's the women's voluntary service with the NAFI wagons giving cups of tea. The NAFI service. It's all about survival, And yeah, it's been absolutely great talking to you, Steve. And again, I urge people to check out the links in the description below and see what they can do, and perhaps we'll go and get some of these books, things like that. So obviously, I was going to ask you what your hopes are, but your hopes are to find a whaleback and get it out there so people can see it. So you've said that already, and other than that, I can see that your enthusiasm for learning more about this subject is there, and I feel that you've. By bringing people together, you are helping to shed a light on this little known aspect of the war. So, did you enjoy doing it in the end?
Absolutely, 100%. I was nervous to start off with, but I think it's a question of once you get going, and if it's helped a little bit for next generation after that, get this whale back. That's the thing.
Yeah, well, I'll just remind people what we've got coming up, and I'll come back and say goodbye. So remember, folks, it is actually Battle of Britain Day today. These events we're talking about were raging 81 years ago, and we've got one more show later. So at 7 p.m. UK time, Alan Allport is coming on to talk about Battle of Britain in popular memory. Alan is absolutely the right person for that show, because his book Britain at Bay, about the whole spirit of Britain in the early part of the war, is just one of them, from my mind, one of the best books I've read in the last 2 or 3 years. And Alan also, as a Brit living in America, he kind of understands the American view of the Battle of Britain, the American view of the British understanding of their own place in history. So we'll have a good talk about that this evening. And then one more show tomorrow. We've got Ben Kite, who is a serving British Army officer, Major General, in fact, coming on to talk about the lessons learned in terms of the doctrine and how air tactics improve post-Battle of Britain. So that'd be a great show to round off what we've learned this week. But right now, it remains me to say thank you very much, Steve Hale, for joining us. And again, I urge people, hopefully you'll see a flurry of memberships to your Facebook pages there, and a bit renewed energy coming in there, because there's people watching these shows from all over the world with all sorts of contacts with museums, things like that. So hopefully there'll be a bit of resurgence of interest. Other than that, folks, I will see you all again tomorrow. So tonight at 7 p.m. So this is Paul Woodadge from World War II TV saying thank you very much, Steve. Thank you very much for your company. I will see you all later.
Paul. Thank you so much. Thank you.